you very much. Can you hear me in the back? Thank you, Bob. So my name is Jeremy Taylor, and before I start, I want to thank Congressman King for his service and former Mayor of Berwyn, Brett Richards, and their desire and honor their fellow getting into this race. I'm going to talk where I stand on the issues, but I think it's important for me to tell you a little bit of who I am and just talk to you from the heart. I grew up on the west side of Sioux City, and as a young man, my parents taught me what service was all about and service to others. My dad was a school teacher, and he'd come home at the end of the day.
Can I make a motion to quiet the floor while we have speakers? Thank you.
At the end of the day, he'd come home from teaching, and he'd pick up a paintbrush and then go and paint in order to provide for our family. On the weekends, then he'd serve in the National Guard, and I followed in his footsteps. My mom taught poor kids how to read, and then she also taught not only them, but us the value of a life committed to Christ. And she taught us that from a very early age. I went to college out in all places, New York, where I was the only conservative at a fairly liberal university. And then I went even further east, and I served on Christian mission at a university in Vietnam. And it's there where I met my wife, Kim, and she came over and legally immigrated. And we had a choice upon serving at the end of that year of where we were going to live. And we knew we had to live in Iowa, in the 4th District. I told her about the great freedoms and about the great people that are here. I was a high school English teacher, and I saw in my students something that was missing. And that thing that was missing was our heritage as a country, the opportunities that were afforded to us that I saw weren't available to people in other countries, and learned that in my service in Vietnam. And let me tell you, I found a way to have them become inspired, and here's what it was. I introduced them to World War II veterans who had served and sacrificed so much, that were part of the greatest generation. And I can tell you to this day that nothing has inspired me as a teacher as introducing our young generation to the greatest of generations. But that inspiration didn't just stop with them, it inspired me. So as a 29-year-old, I decided that I was going to enlist. And so with 2 kids, 1 on the way, as a family decision, I enlisted as an intelligence analyst in the United States Army. And I went through training, but I was 29 years old, and I was among a lot of 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. I had a faith in Jesus Christ, and they looked to me as someone who was a little older. In fact, I was known as a grandpa of the platoon, if you can believe that, at 29. That experience gave me the opportunity to speak hope and counsel into their lives. And so I decided to serve at even higher authority and become a chaplain in the United States Army. To nurture the living, to care and comfort the wounded, and to honor the dead. And I've done that the last 7 years in the Iowa Army National Guard. And it's always been about service for me. And so I served from 2010 to 12 in the Iowa House when Republicans took back the House, and we stood for life. We stood for the Second Amendment, and we became change agents in the state. The House Republicans and now Senate Republicans and Iowa Republicans, thanks to all of you, have initiated a conservative movement in our state. I'm on the 2nd term of the County Board of Supervisors in Woodbury County that was dominated for some 3 decades by Democrats. We turned that around too. So I'm a husband and a father and a chaplain, a soldier, a businessman, and an elected official. And so when people asked me to consider running for Congress, I was hesitant. Because Congressman King has served this community for years, has always been my congressman. I voted for him in every single election. But my worry was this, that if we don't make a change, we may lose this seat to a Democrat. And I'll tell you why. In Woodbury County on election night, I had 19,000 votes and won with about 55%. Congressman King had about 15,000 votes and lost our county with 45%. I looked at the numbers across all the other 38 other counties, and there was a similar trajectory. Only winning by about 3.3% against somebody who was parading around the 4th District with Bernie Sanders and holding a baseball. And so my worry is this, that if we don't take back the House of Representatives at the federal level, and we can't seat the 4th District, that's for sure, that if we don't take back that House of Representatives from the likes of Nancy Pelosi, Ilhan Omar, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, our children aren't going to recognize the country that we inherited. And that is my number one goal in stepping forward. And so I didn't get into this race to bash Congressman King. In fact, I think if you'll look at my 100% conservative track record for the American Conservative Union, my time in the Iowa House, my time on the County Board of Supervisors, and my time in the military, you'll see some very similar stances. And I got into this race when I saw Randy Feenstra go out on CNN and attack my congressman. I thought it was unfair, I thought it was unnecessary, and raise money off the liberal left in this country. But I think it's important, if we do hit the reset button, if we do look to change hands, that we have an authentic conservative. And here's why. What happened for 2 years when Republicans were in the majority? Not a lot. In fact, I think you can look at the border wall that President Trump was championing and see a failure on behalf of the House leadership. I think you can look at life. I think you can look at spending. What did they cut substantively in spending? Not a whole lot. It's been a problem for Democrats, but it can't just be a problem for Republicans when we're in the minority. We have to lead. And so if you look at the folks who are supporting my campaign, they're the same ones that brought Rick Santorum to victory in Iowa. They're the same ones that led Sam Clovis's campaign, who I consider a good friend. They're the same ones that helped President Trump on the national level. And there are folks that I've met with time and time again in the 4th District who say this: we appreciate that you're not in this to bash your current congressman, and I'm not. We appreciate that you have the same conservative, stalwart stances, but we appreciate that it's time that we make sure that we don't lose this seat. It's far too important. Like Tammy said, this is like 1776. So I believe I'm the conservative who can win this seat. And just listen for a second to the other side. I mean, the other side is talking about bringing socialism to our country. And if you don't believe that, or if you think that's hyperbole, I never saw or thought I'd see the day when an avowed socialist could be the nominee for one of our major parties. And I can tell you this: if we have a new green disaster, this new Green Deal, I don't believe our country could recover from it. I really don't. If things go the way they are, our finances as a nation won't be solvent if interest rates hit 8.5%, 9% on a $22 trillion national debt. I want to tell you this. I lived for a year in Vietnam. My wife and her family know where this is heading. And I can tell you this because in April of 1975, when the communist North took over, my wife's father was taken to a re-education camp. And that's where he died in 1986. And what was his crime? His crime was fighting for freedom. His crime was fighting alongside boys from Iowa and Kansas for their freedoms. And when they came to take his body back in 1986 after he died, they said he hasn't served a long enough sentence. His body remains here. Socialism is evil. And we came this past summer to introduce our kids to their grandfather buried where he fell. And I loved my time in Vietnam because we had men that I'd see on a train with a tattooed number on their arm, and they'd say quietly, "America is very good." They'd listen quietly to Ronald Reagan and the hope and promise that he was giving them in a very dark time. And so when my wife came here, she looked at the freedoms, and I re-fell in love with America again. She looked at this and says, we have the ability to vote and then criticize someone that we put into power? And I said, yes, we do. We have the ability to move across state lines whenever and wherever we want? You mean I can open a business on my own without the government's approval? And I said, you're doggone right we can. And so she did. The abundance of God-given resources. I never took for granted my religious liberty and freedom as a chaplain. But I can tell you the light on her face to be able to go to church and to be able to worship the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ freely is something that inspires me to this day. So we owe it to all of those who came before us, like that greatest generation, but also to those who come after us. So I am a constitutional conservative. I believe in limited government, lower taxes and liberty, and that Washington has failed us with this $22 trillion national debt. I believe that Washington's failure hurts our farmers and our businessmen. And as Washington fails, the establishment politicians, what do? They try to cover their own failures with greater taxes on income, property, everything from phone service to internet. And as someone who has a combined 260,000 miles on our family vans, let me just close with this. I know that the value of talking about the kitchen table issues is important to all Iowans. I'll stand for the sanctity of human life, the Second Amendment, and I believe in American exceptionalism. I'm going to be in every one of your counties. I appreciate the opportunity to tell our story, to make our case, and to take that conservative mantle and leadership and to be your next congressman in the future. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.